It's time to get the comic book retrospective crew back together, and now we're going to go back to one of the most important comic books of all times, introducing perhaps the greatest villain, maybe not in fiction history, but certainly in comic book history. Here to talk to me about that are my good friends, comic book editor, award-winning editor, comic book writer Joe Corolla. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We've also got the man who I believe was a wee lad when this comic book came out in March of 1940. The voice of the voiceless, the man so cool they call him the Breed. Eric Breed, how are you doing?
Speak up. I mean, I'm good.
Obviously, Breed isn't quite 82 years old, but in March of 1940, we got the very first appearance of the Joker in Batman #1. And we also get what many probably thought at the time was the last appearance of the Joker. It's interesting in here, Joe. There are a lot of things associated with this Joker that are absolutely still alive in comic books today. The look is pretty much the same. He still has the Joker toxin that makes people smile when they die. And even he's got the ha-ha-ha laughs and all that stuff that you still see prevalent in comic books today.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't lean as heavily into, the deck of cards kind of stuff that you see them kind of trying to do something with in these issues. But yeah, I mean, the green hair, like everything, like it's really all right there. And you can tell that Steve Englehart really loved this stuff, not just because he used a bunch of Golden Age villains, including like Hugo Strange when he did that run on Detective Comics, but the Laughing Fish storyline, which we've covered here, has very similar imagery and a very similar set of circumstances that's going on. It's Joker's gonna, kill these people at like a certain time, and they're not going to be able to stop them. Like it's really great to see how timeless the story is, that Englehart could basically pluck this story from at the time like 37 years prior and do a very similar approach to it, and it read just as fresh then, and that story is considered timeless too. It's really impressive.
Obviously, Batman was introduced in Detective Comics #27. Bill Kane, Bob Finger creating the character on this comic book as well, Breed. But this is a different time in DC Comics. They're only releasing this comic book initially, like quarterly at the time, and there's only like 6 comic books that they're doing in total. Like there's Superman, there's Flash, you got Batman, Ultraman, was there Sandman? There's another character out there as well. So it's very limited publication at the time.
One of the things about Batman at the time, I mean, obviously he was the opposite of Superman, whereas the movies had enacted the Hays Code, which basically took the teeth out of most of the sex and violence in movies. Comics were still 14, 15 years away from having their own code. So you get some stuff in these early issues that are pretty jarring, even when read today.
They're absolutely going a little edgy there. Is that what we would call nowadays, Joe?
I believe so, yeah. And, before we also get too into it, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who have opinions on, like, Bob Kane that might be listening, and people who might generally be interested in questions like, okay, but how much did Bob Kane really contribute to this story? As far as we know, Bob Kane did do at bare minimum, did the character pencils for this story. Jerry Robinson, who also gets a lot of credit for, as like a co-creator of like the Joker and things like that to people, was the inker on this story. Bill Finger did write this story, and the backgrounds and coloring were done by George Roussos. I might be butchering the name, I apologize, but there were a lot of people involved in making this happen. Bob Kane did contribute to this issue, but there were other people, including Bill Finger, Jerry Robinson, and George Roussos, who contributed quite a bit and made this issue possible.
So, Joe, I'm glad you bring up Jerry Robinson in here, because his work really does stand out, not only just being the inker. He's the letterer in this comic book as well. And there's a lot of really cool things that he does. Like, you can tell when certain characters are speaking because the font, which he's doing by hand, is just a little bit different. You never really get to see something that cool in modern comic books because it's kind of all digital. Also, the first letter almost of every speaking bubble that you get is done in a very unique way, which I think is kind of associated with DC at the time, but he does a really fantastic job, and it makes it a better reading experience.
Oh, absolutely. I think this book really does hold up visually, even compared to a lot of other, Golden Age books. The way that they're able to show off, especially the Joker in different disguises, and when people get the Joker toxin and their faces are stretched, like it's really like chilling and disturbing.
In Batman #1, there are actually 5 stories in total. There's a short story recapping the origin of Bruce Wayne, Batman, and how that comes to be. There are 2 Joker stories that we're going to review here today, but there's also a Catwoman story, and there's also a Hugo Strange story. So there's definitely a lot to capture in there if you want to experience a comic book for yourself. Let's jump into the Joker, the introduction of the most famous villain in the history of comic books, Eric Breen. And we see him right off the bat, very menacing stuff, and we find out he's this career criminal, and he is doing something very diabolical. He's taking over radio stations. He's letting people know who he's going to kill, what he's going to steal, and then he's actually doing it, and no one can stop him.
Right off the bat, and the cops surround the guy. He's going, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. He goes, don't worry, you're not going to die. Then he dies. And then they break into the safe. And then we cut to Dick and Bruce. And Dick says, golly, gee whiz, shouldn't we take a crack at him? And I can see Batman. Yeah, Bruce is lighting a pipe. Not just yet. Let's wait for a few more murders, Dick. Then we'll.
It's not ripe yet. It's not ready.
It's not right. It's like, yeah, great story, but there are some things you can kind of snicker at, and that was one of them.
Well, there are definitely some changes that, things that don't appear exactly how we see Batman and Joker today, especially when the two end up fighting, because there are many different ways that the Joker ends up killing people. He doesn't just go into the guy's house and poison him with something that will kill him exactly 24 hours later. But he ends up doing, placing darts and phones and doing all kinds of things to inject people with this Joker toxin so they'll end up smiling. And he's always one step ahead of the police. But at one point, Batman does seem to get the drop on him, and they go and they're fighting on a bridge. And you would imagine, by today's standards, Batman would absolutely beat the crap out of him. But Joker is kind of physical here, and he actually puts up a pretty good fight, and he might have knocked Batman silly.
Yeah, it is kind of jarring, reading comics like from this time where Joker in a panel is punching Bruce in the face saying, I'm going to kill you, which is something that you don't really see as much, certainly in like Silver Age Batman. but yeah, it is interesting. I mean, that whole sequence, it's really riveting. I mean, you got Batman like on the car while Joker's trying to shoot him. The car goes off the bridge as they're like seemingly flying in the air because Batman's like tackled Joker, and then they're just punching and kicking each other. Like it's a really exciting chain of events that leads to Batman being kicked in the face off a bridge.
Absolutely. He was knocked silly, and he ends up recovering once he gets the cold water and all that stuff. And the Joker's gotten away for the first time of many, Eric Breed, in their first physical encounter. And the Joker seems to be a pretty good foil for Batman in this comic book story.
Keep in mind, this is very early in Batman's career. So he hasn't developed into the peak of physical perfection yet. And as time goes on, Batman spends his whole life fighting people like the Joker. The Joker's more cerebral. So it stands to reason that their physical confrontations going forward would become more one-sided. But it was totally believable in this context that he could get the drop on him.
We get another message from the Joker that he's actually going to kill a judge this time. We see the judge. He's in a room with like the police commissioner of all people, Joe. And as it's happening, Joker once again gets the drop on him. Every single time he murders somebody, he does it in a very unique way, very diabolical, but also completely unpredictable, setting the stage for the Joker that we know today, because apparently he's the master of disguise, and all of a sudden his Joker face just pops out of the commissioner, surprising the crap out of the judge and kind of murdering him right there on the spot. But thankfully, Batman and Robin were staking the place out, and Batman told Robin, if you see anybody leave this house, you tail them.
This is one of the it's the first time we see Joker bash Robin in the head.
Beating up kids, yes.
Which which
ties
is
him down.
Which we get to late. But again, it's also like it's pretty remarkable. You don't see a lot of Silver Age. Dick Grayson getting just pummeled in the head with a blunt object.
We also get to see Batman, at least some origin stories of him becoming a detective. He's got an infrared light that he's using to track Robin to where he ended up going, so he can at least get there and intervene on his behalf.
And lots of punching.
I do want to point out that it was the police chief, because one of the questions I had reading this was, where was Commissioner Gordon during all this? I mean, he's been established already.
There's a chief of police and there's a commissioner. Apparently, they're two different people.
But also, they look very much alike because pretty much everybody in that position looked like that guy.
Yeah, they all have the same hat on, same uniform,
and interestingly enough, he didn't kill him. He just left him trussed up.
Breen, he goes into the house. He discovers what's going on. There's a physical altercation, but in the meantime, something happens. The house gets lit on fire, and he has to make a decision. He ends up grabbing Robin, saving him, but at the same time, they see the Joker and they track him down, and they go on a big chase. Robin is essentially the ace up the sleeve of Batman, and he ends up getting the drop on Joker in the end.
Yeah, and they go from this nice, lavish terrace to an unfinished construction site, and Robin just says, "I've had enough of you," and kicks him off the building. It's like, see ya.
Appears to have murdered him, but Batman thankfully catches the Joker
right
in the air and puts him in jail.
Yep, and this time he does knock him out with one punch, so Batman's already getting tougher.
Yeah.
We do get a little teaser here at the end stating that the Joker is already planning his escape, and that leads us into the Joker Returns in the various comic book, and we see right off the bat, Joe, that the Joker has escaped. In fact, instead of regular teeth, he's got a couple of fake teeth in his mouth. He pulls them out. If you put them together, they become plastic explosives, and he blows up the jail and escapes. By Colin, how did that happen?
I mean, don't try that at home, kids. Never keep explosives that close to your mouth.
What if he chewed on it? He could have blown his head off.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't have been good for anybody. But yeah, he gets out surprisingly in the same issue, which really calls into question, Batman's effectiveness. Which would be something that fans argue with to this day. Yeah,
I catch him, you keep him.
Not his responsibility.
Somebody's not holding up their end.
In all fairness, this Batman also just leaves the Joker in the front of the police station at the end instead of making sure they book him. But whatever. It was a different time.
So the Joker escapes. Batman's befuddled. Like, I can't believe he escaped in only 2 days, Breed. It turns out the Joker has a secret lair in a cemetery. He ends up pulling up like a headstone and getting in there, and it's revealed to be the Joker. But you already knew it was him, right?
Now, we talked about this at the beginning. The dart and the phone.
Yes.
Now,
he yelled so loud that the reverberations shot the dart into his ear.
I'm willing to suspend the disbelief of how he got into the safe, plans his murders a day in advance, fools everybody. But really, a dart and the phone. Just saying.
But also, we gotta go, the amount of foreshadowing of the Joker being bent on murdering Robin. Like that first splash image of the Joker with a hatchet trying to murder Robin by cutting down that flagpole he's on. It's just man, that was one really long setup for a payoff in comics.
If Sherlock Holmes, it's like Moriarty probably wanted to get Watson out of the way. It's just like if you got your arch nemesis, you don't need any side distractions.
Well, technically, Robin's the one that took him down in the first story. Batman's the one that saved him. Robin's the one that almost murdered him.
Yeah, and yet it's Crazy Quilt who's obsessed with getting back at Robin and not Joker. It's funny how life works.
Well, Joker did almost. Oh, he didn't almost. He did murder one of the Robins, so he got his payback, I guess. This has been a duel for a while, but we do get the kooky thing. He does go back to announcing who he's going to kill and what he's going to steal, and once again, he's very effective at this, Joe. They cannot successfully apprehend him a second time, and he does almost kill Robin in the process.
No, he absolutely does, and kills a bunch of other people. We got a lot of...
He kicks him off of the top of a roof, and thankfully, because Robin's a circus performer, he's able to catch a pole.
Yeah, but he's using guns, he's using axes, he's hiding in like sarcophaguses, like just or as they were put back then, a mummy case.
Because he's looking for Cleopatra's long lost necklace or whatever.
Yes.
Eventually, Batman has had enough, Brady. He's like, screw this. We need to come up with a better plan. Bruce Wayne goes to Commissioner Gordon's office because there's a police commissioner, there's a chief of police, and he says, we need to do something to bait out this dude and get him to come in there. Maybe if we publicize that the fire ruby or some type of really expensive, really valuable gem is going to be at a specific location, we can lure him out there. And wouldn't you know it, he took the bait like a moron.
Who's dumber, though? That or the guy who cut himself on a deck of cards and died?
Yeah, it's like, I'm glad you
or the police officer said, hey, there's a deck of cards that no one knows where they came from. This guy's only been dealing with this Joker card. Don't touch. It's like, yeah, why don't you play some solitaire?
Did anybody check the deck? No. Just go have some fun.
He finds a lot of ways to murder people in one issue. I'll give him that. There's like at least 6 or 7 ways he kills people.
And so we draw the Joker out and find out that he's a pretty good shot. Basically, it takes out half the police force.
And he does say, I realize that you're wearing a bulletproof vest now. I'm going to shoot you in the face. So he is also a problem solver.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once again, as these stories are wont to do, they head to the rooftops, and I said poor Robin falls off. And you ever notice the proliferation of flagpoles in comic book stories?
Back then, it was a different era. It was more patriotic. Everyone was flying the flag. You had to have one of those on your building.
More often than not, though, there's not a flag.
Yeah,
you just need the pole. You can't fly the flag at night. Well, you'd have to take it down at sundown and all that stuff. People used to actually obey the rules and stuff. So, Joe, they do end up on the rooftop. It's Batman versus Joker, mano a mano. Joker pulls out what looks to be a Rambo-style knife that he wants to pierce into the chest of Batman. It does not work out well for him because Batman gives him the Olay, and Joker stabs himself in the chest like a moron. And then we get the classic ha, 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 ha stuff coming out of his mouth as he's dying.
Oh, yeah, no. So I guess at least he didn't puncture his lungs, because that would have made the ha, ha, ha very difficult. But
a bit of gurgle.
Hey, there you go. That's something. But yeah, I mean, it's so creepy reading something like this and just seeing like Joker like laughing triumphantly as he's seemingly dying.
And it appears that he does die. They check the body, and he doesn't die for very long, though, because I believe he shows up in Batman #2.
Oh, he's alive at the end, like 3 panels later.
That's
how the story ends.
I might have. I just examined this man. He isn't dead. He's still alive, and he's going to live.
So we get the Joker coming back.
Yeah, which was, I believe that was like a last call editing choice for them to be like, oh, well, why don't we keep him alive? Because we think this will be good. And obviously it panned out. I think the Joker being around has worked out for DC.
So, Breen, sometimes when you create a character and you create the first nemesis, you create Mole Man, and sometimes you create the Joker. One of them is a little bit more successful.
Well, let's not sell the Mole Man short. He's lasted 60 plus years.
He's a great character, but he's just not quite.
Now, Miracle Man and Fantastic Four 3, not so much.
Sure.
Now, my question would be, if I could go back and ask the Joker, I said, he's wearing a bulletproof vest. Shouldn't you have tried to stab him in the head too?
It would have been smarter.
Yeah, or shoot him in the leg, anything. But
yeah, just
no, there's some arteries there. You can
could have taken out the Achilles tendon.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, Bob Kane was really, ahead of his time. I mean, even back then, he was saying one day in the far future, this character will be in a movie with Lady Gaga, and it will be a musical.
Boom! That's when you finally made it.
All kidding aside, I can't think of one individual comic that, like I said, because you have the first appearances of the Joker and Catwoman. You've got a follow-up appearance of Hugo Strange. That was a dime well spent.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The stories are good too. Like you could publish the story today, maybe tweak the art or whatever, and people would buy it and be like, "Yeah, that's a good comic book."
I'd say his first issues, I mean, infinitely better than any of the early Superman stories because I said they were allowed to get darker. There seemed to be more oomph to these stories, not to take anything away from the early Superman stories, but this comic book, though, published 82 years ago, like you said, modernize the art, and you don't really have to change a line. This book works today. It's just amazing how well done this book was.
Absolutely. Now, Joe, people are not going to be able to go out and afford a issue of Batman #1, even if it's like graded at a 1 or something. It's just like half a cover. It's still going to be too expensive. Where can we find this bad boy? Because it is an amazing story. If you haven't read Batman #1, you need to go out there and read it.
Absolutely. There are, it was in the archives. They did, there's the Dark Knight archives. That's how I read it as well. But the stories also included, there's Golden Age Batman trade paperbacks. I believe it's in the first volume, might be in the second, but there's the Golden Age Omnibus. This would be in the first omnibus. And it should be readily available on like the DC Unlimited app and all that stuff. This has been reprinted a lot. There are other trades, I'm pretty sure.
They just did a reprinting of this, in your comic shop within the last 60 days.
Yeah. And they also did a reprint, I think, recently of Detective 38, which was the first Robin. And stuff like, even though the first Robin and Batman #1, if you're talking newsstand, you effectively could have probably gotten them around the same time, depending on the distribution, or how often you went to the newsstand. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Batman 1 has not been released yet. They've done 27 and 38 from Detective. I think Batman 1 is coming.
It might be about the time this drops.
Yeah, like the next, within a month, I think. So, yeah, those, I love those. I've been getting every one of those that come out now, and because you get all the ads, all the side stories, and there are a lot
of ads and little extra funny comic books in this thing to be enjoyed. Absolutely. Earlier, Joe Corallo talked about all the things that were inspired by this particular comic book. We've already reviewed a couple of them. One of them in particular, Strange Apparitions, Hugo Strange, absolutely beautiful comic book. Amazing. We actually go through the entire 4 or 5 issue story arc that it is. I think this is 40 minutes, but it's 40 minutes well worth your time and effort to watch this. This is one of the best Batman stories of all time. Definitely check this out. You don't see it here. There's also a link in the video description.